2013, Zimbabwe signed into law a new constitution. The constitution which ushered in a new era and hope for the nation. However, the existing acts were incoherent and out of sync with the requirements of the new charter. Since the constitution is the supreme law of the land, all the pieces of legislation that showed irregularities had to be aligned to the constitution. To facilitate the process, in 2015, Cabinet established the Inter Ministerial Taskforce, IMT, on the alignment of legislation to the Constitution.
The basic functions of the IMT is to coordinate the work of the line ministries in attending to the task of aligning the legislation which has been assigned to their various ministers, so that legislation is then aligned to the Constitution.
The Ministry of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs is playing a very critical role in the alignment of legislation to the Constitution. The Ministry of Justice do administer the Constitution, and as such it must ensure that all constitutional obligations for the state are performed diligently and without delay.
Basically, alignment starts with the line ministries. That's why we find line ministries have been incorporated into the structure. When we say line ministries, we are now working with the legal experts within the ministries and their permanent secretaries for policy level assistance and direction.
The IMT engages civil society organizations through the Zimbabwe Civic Society Constitutional Consortium, CSO Consortium, which consists of 48 organizations and is dedicated to monitoring and evaluating the implementation of provisions of the Constitution of Zimbabwe by the state and its institutions, as well as assisting in the process of entrenching constitutionalism through a constitutionally aware and engaged citizenry.
Together with the Center for Applied Legal Research, we have managed to influence the establishment of a collaborative framework between Parliament and the IMT on alignment. The constitutional mandate of Parliament is to hold ministries to account. So it is only Parliament that can call upon ministries or make them account for the delays in the alignment process. So we felt that there is need to establish that collaborative framework. So it's now in place and we are happy about it. And at the last meeting of the Liaison and Coordination Committee, which is a forum of chairpersons of committees, the IMT was invited. The AG was there to make a presentation on the status of alignment. And the collaborative framework now also involves the IMT coming regularly to brief portfolio committees of Parliament.
Just being able to have a cohesive identity within the lawmaking agenda during this period was very, very important. I think that speaks to the value of the IMT process, or rather the CSO organizing around the IMT process, which I think was quite valuable. I think secondly, the value of it being in the consortium was that it allowed civil society to have its own space to determine if that was the agenda that they wanted to see. It allowed civil society to also unpack the government agenda and to see whether there was any value for it for citizens within that space, and to begin to critique not a sort of a specialized or special interest critique, but a broad-based critique of the different pieces of law that were coming through or were being tabled or were being proposed, and for civil society to have an input in a very formalized way in that space, but to be able to convene very broadly outside of that space to be able to determine what is our agenda, for example, with public health, what is our agenda, for example, with education, what is and being able to reduce it to the legalities of it.
We have been actively engaging the IMT and the various line ministries. We know, for example, that the paper on the disability was shared with the IMT and the various stakeholders. There are papers such as the Traditional Leaders Bill. So where they've been, where the IMT has put through the line ministry consultations, we believe that there's been quite a lot of uptake of those areas where we've done position papers.
Our carefully couched concerns have been articulated to the point of them being understood by the target audience, which has been the policymakers. So we've sat in meetings where they have considered that our issues really require alignment. Not necessarily all of them, but they've tended to concede. In fact, as part of our engagement with them, we also had a triangulation workshop where Parliament was able to invite some of these crucial stakeholders for interaction. And in that particular instance, the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General were able to actually say, you know what, we concede, these are issues that we must address.
In all this work, the IMT has not been working in isolation. Various partners, including civil society organizations, went through stakeholder consultations on the different bills. One of the key features in this process has been the wide consultations by the IMT and its partners as they reached out to targeted stakeholders so that they make their contributions on what they perceived should be embodied, adjusted, or removed in the statutes so that they are in sync with the dictates of the Constitution.
A warm welcome to this week's edition of the program Constitutional Legislative Alignment Process, brought to you by the Inter Ministerial Taskforce on the alignment of legislation to the Constitution.
The IMT is going to support the holding of stakeholder consultative workshops. So we anticipate that these consultations are going to be widespread and they're going to be community-based.
This process again should be national because concerns in different corners of the country are different. So we have to have opinions of the people in all the 10 provinces. This is why it is important to have views of all people around the country. Now, this is the reason why we are gathered here. So I want to believe that it is a very important process. Now, the participation too is equally important because we must have the views of all the stakeholders.
It makes me feel like we are getting involved in something that is going to benefit us. And it is a pleasure and an advantage that we as the children are taking part in this decision-making process, and we are not being given decisions that were made by some people who are not the direct people that are being affected by these laws.
I think it's thorough enough in terms of going piece of legislation by piece of legislation. I appreciate it's a massive process that involves so many pieces of legislation that have, I would say, commonalities, and there need to be thorough in the process so that at least we don't come up with conflicting legislation.
The IMT has made strides in leading the legislative alignment process. A raft of laws have been taken to Parliament for approval, while a number of acts that include the Zimbabwe Gender Commission Bill and the Labour Amendment Bill of 2015 have been signed into law. Some bills are being pushed before Parliament, and other draft bills are going through the stakeholder consultation processes.
The work that the IMT has done, I think one of the most important, significant and visible impacts is that the process is now in place. There are structures that are there for the IMT which enable the ministries that are involved to be able to start initiating the law reform processes required to ensure that the laws are compliant with the Constitution all the way through Cabinet and all the way to Parliament.
The IMT had to conduct stakeholder consultations whenever any bill or law was to be aligned. The training of law officers in the various ministries who would advise their respective ministries assisted in a number of ministries identifying laws that were in need of alignment. There are some ministries that have managed to have all their laws aligned, and all this has been achieved due to the assistance of the IMT. The IMT, with the assistance of its development partners, came up with a website which came in very handy in trying to give information to the public on the work of the IMT.
In 2016 alone, the IMT was working on received requests for technical and financial assistance for the alignment of 16 pieces of legislation. That was in 2016 alone, whereas in 2015 requests were received for 6 pieces of legislation. So as you can see, there's actually been quite a significant improvement.
Alignment of Zimbabwe's laws to the Constitution shall not only be instrumental in assisting the delivery of fundamental human rights and freedoms, but shall also foster an era where dreams and exploits that work in building a better Zimbabwe are nurtured and preserved for successive generations. With technical support from the Center for Applied Legal Research and the European Union, the efforts of the IMT have reaped considerable results in granting Zimbabweans laws that uphold their fundamental human rights.
Naturally, there are challenges in most such processes. I am happy, though, with the progress that we have made so far. We have succeeded in aligning the bulk of the statutes which needed to be aligned to the Constitution. There are a few statutes which are left, and we are attending to them. I'm particularly happy that our consultants have really been up to scratch in this whole process, and I'm also happy that we have received funding, both from Treasury and from donors, to be able to carry out this process. And it is my hope that by next year, 2019, we will have completed the task of aligning our statutes to our Constitution.